Come on into the ditch. I'm your resident ditch witch, Tara Tyne, and we're about to get witchy, whether you like it or not. Today, I am honored to be joined by my very good friend, Dr. Bairavee Balasubramanium, the Sky Priestess. Bairavee is of Malaysian Tamil heritage and a fellow Pratchett fan. As a youngster, she revealed herself to be an outstanding academic who finished her high schooling at 13 and continued her self-led education all over the world, aided by merit-based awards and scholarships from the age of 16. Realizing that tertiary education was the best way to effect positive change in the world, she decided to pursue politics and history and wrote her thesis in dramaturgy of the Indian Parliament at the age of 25. Since then, she has been frequently featured in Tamil media, but luckily for us, she hasn't been tempted off the path of some other celebrity astrologers and the glitzy world of showbiz. Like all the best priestesses, Bairavee was gifted her title of Sky Priestess by a member of her community. Although, much like the rest of us, she's not always entirely clear on how she ended up here. I had a whole ream of easy questions as well lined up for tell us who you are and what you do and that kind of thing. But Bairavee had other plans. She decided she was going to make me think as well. So I think we're going to loosen up my usual format and it's going to be more like a chat today. So let's jump on in. Bairavee, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me on the channel.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. We've been friends for a very long time, and I'm just really happy that we had the opportunity to do something together like this.
Yes, it's great that we're finally doing it where I suppose we can let other people into the conversation too, because we would often chat to each other when things are getting a bit crazy, sort of in the ether, and we need to bounce off somebody who sort of gets the crack. And myself and Bairavee seem to have had that connection from. I don't exactly specifically remember how we met online. I feel like I came across one of your Sky Priestess groups on Facebook when you still had those. I think it was something like that. I ended up in one and we got chatting and we knew immediately talking to each other that we were coming from such a similar place, despite being in some ways worlds apart. We've actually never met in person, which is really weird. Like it feels like we have. I've met your brother Ash in person, but
Ireland hasn't invited me yet, love.
Yes, well, I mean, let's not confuse people. You know, I've invited you. It's just that the land of Ireland hasn't created the reason for you to come here yet, and I understand that it's a very long way from where you are. And the same is probably why I haven't made it to you yet, but we will. Our crats will definitely pause at some point. Great start. So I suppose, well, we start chatting with one of the most obvious things that I suppose we have in common, and probably have in common with a lot of the viewers who are tuning into us today as well. Being at odds with the culture in which you were raised.
Okay. Well, a little bit of quick context. Now, I'm not trying to diss anyone here because what I'm talking about happened 25, 30 years ago. And since then, there has been a cultural shift in this country. But I grew up in a context where there was a lot of racial discrimination. And it doesn't matter who you are, what you earn, whether you're intelligent or not. If you had dark skin, you were seen as shit, basically. And, that didn't make childhood very easy for me. Because on top of that, I turned into one of those freaks who could, read an encyclopedia and shit when she was like 6 and so on. And, I was into like string theory and black holes even before that. And it really didn't help. So I also realized later that I was almost certainly on the autism Asperger's spectrum. And there was no language for that at that age. So you put all of that together, combined with institutional racism from students and administrators. And what you had is me looking at this and going at about age 11, actually, fuck school, I'm going to do it myself, which is what I did. Because it just didn't make sense to take on so many people and not have anywhere to turn to.
Mm.
I mean, I was always born with spiritual gifts, if you want to call them that. I could always tell when someone is going to die. I could always tell when there's something not right in the environment, even when I was a baby. And that just added to that feeling of intense alienation. Honestly, I don't know how I survived my childhood. I don't even know how I made it this far. But I think up to my early 30s, what kept me going was this real need to prove myself till I realized, sod it. It's completely unnecessary. I'm here. That's what it is, you know? But that's certainly something that just put me in that other category for a wide variety of reasons.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel that like I sort of, my experiences were different in a way, but I definitely know the feeling of being an outsider. And it's like the more you become you in the truest sense, the more of an outsider you start to feel. Like, I moved from the town to the countryside, so the people in the countryside didn't trust me as a townie, and then vice versa back the other way. And there seemed to be a lot of that kind of going on, like moving between worlds, moving between cultures. And I think that's probably actually why nobody bestowed the name of Ditch Witch on me. I should make that clear from the outset. I bestowed that on myself as a sort of a private joke to myself when I started writing books. I wanted some initials. I thought DW sounded cool. And I thought in the same moment, Ditch Witch, of course, it makes so much sense because I'm constantly moving, crossing boundaries from one world into another. But what that truly means in the long-term sense is that you never fully belong to any one place. And it can be very disorientating. It can be even when sometimes then one of the worst things sometimes you can do is decide that you're going to try and belong somewhere, that this is it. I don't want to be pushed from pillar to post anymore. I want to be settled and rooted like everybody else. And you find, I think, maybe, I don't know if it's things that are in our stars, which we'll talk about later, or what combination of maybe karma people might refer to it as. But it seems as though, no, that's just not the path for you, or at least not now anyway. And that actually you have an awful lot less choice in the matter than you'd been giving yourself credit for all that time. So I find that probably to be one of the most overarching themes when you're talking about kind of being an outsider over the years, is that, it's not really a matter of choice all the time as well. Like, and I have done my best at times to fit in. Do you reckon you've spent much time doing that? Have you tried to fit in?
Totally. I absolutely did. I mean, either I would like try to erase myself and pretend I wasn't there, or I would very awkwardly try to hang out with people, and it just never worked. Because one thing I will give myself credit for is that there was a part of me that was old when I was born.
Yes.
So that part of me always watched me and just went, what in the shit are you doing?
Yeah.
But, the rest of me was like, but I want friends and I want to do this and I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I really tried hard. And when I couldn't find that way to gel with people and connect to people, because what I've noticed is when someone has psychic sight, they are automatically in a different category. And I don't mean that in a hierarchical way. It's like when you can see a reality and you're not crazy, you can prove it. You can actually be consistent with what you see and why you see it. You can tell a person about the history of a place, even though you've never been there, and they can look it up. So when you can actually show and demonstrate that you have that, it becomes really hard to talk to people who don't live in that reality. I mean, I have a good relationship with my brother now, but we were living in completely separate worlds, because and I'm sure you've had your fair share of that as well. We are very similar in certain ways. But when you have that and you don't have, the language to say what you're seeing, and you don't have anyone to talk to, that in itself just kind of, you try to pretend that you don't have it. You try to pretend that everything's normal, but that doesn't work.
No. And so I suppose the next thing I wanted to bring up is when it doesn't work. How long does it take, in your opinion, to learn to protect yourself and to learn to cope when you've made decisions maybe that were trying to swim against the natural, maybe fatalistic flow of your life, when you've tried to fit in, when you've tried to stand still, when you've tried to put down roots, and it all goes horribly, horribly wrong. I suppose one of the first big lessons we have to learn as witchy ladies really is how to protect ourselves. And then I mean that's probably the most urgent one, is you're putting yourself into situations where you end up feeling attacked, and sometimes you are being attacked. And so then you have to, the first thing is, I have to stop this from happening to me. And then after that, you have to sit down and start to process the fallout of all of those experiences and learn to cope with the feelings and the energy that arises from that, when you start to pay attention to kind of what you've been ignoring when you're maybe going fight or flight on the world, or you're, it's when you've been focusing on learning to protect yourself.
Understood. I mean, for me, and I was a very stubborn person. I mean, some would say I'm still very stubborn, but it really depends on what you're talking about. But I just kept trying to hit everything with the sledgehammer of my mind, because, I'm one of those kids, and my brother is as well. We were Bensons, got tested as genius level IQ when we were kids. So I always had that option to just focus on that. And I was writing like master level papers when I was like in my undergrad. And that was how I chose to escape. But I think things changed for me, and I could only make that shift for myself when I realized that I was not my intelligence. That was a skill. I was not the knowledge that I had learned from books, and I was certainly not my mind. And that hit me about 20. And the way 2021, about that time. And the way it hit me was through a very, very terrible, severe health crisis that basically meant I couldn't do anything. Just shortly after the first year, I began doing my PhD in England, and I couldn't do much at all. My body was in a complete state, and I had run out of ways that I could escape through my mind, and I had to sit and very humbly take it every single day, moment to moment, listen to the body. And eventually that maybe put me on the path to finding some real wisdom that has had worth and value in my life and in others' lives. But for me, the teacher was pain. Mm-hmm. Either you learn through a shift of consciousness that comes through insight, a vision, or even a blessing, or you get your ass kicked hard enough till you actually listen. That's when it happens.
Yeah. And I suppose that's the difference between sort of falling into a path like this and going seeking it out. I remember when I was a child, I'd sometimes play at being witches. And this is a video I've attempted to broach on this subject a couple of times. Like, how did I actually get onto the path of being a ditch witch? But I think maybe it took the conversation of two people to really get it out of me, because there's so many parts to it. Yeah, exactly. And you start to wonder, was that really a part of it, or wasn't it? And I remember being a child and playing at witches, magic spells, and making potions. And I kept a book that I called my spell book and things like that, maybe when I was about 5 or 6. And like that, was maybe a bit too into the reading of the books, things like that. I was very consumed with that, and probably always had one foot in the real world and another world in fiction and fantasy, really. So witches I was always drawn to. But as I became a teenager, then I didn't I kind of had other things going on. I might have still held notions of maybe toying around with things like that, but I didn't do much, and I kind of forgot about it very quickly and got into reading about theology and things like that. I sort of put it down and went, this is child's play. I don't, this is fantasy, and I need to now align myself with the real world. And I had a similar feeling to you, like if there are provable things that I can reference and talk about with other people, that maybe it might be a little bit easier to sort of get some feedback from other people on this thing, and to change something in the world, I suppose, is something I always felt strongly about doing. And the more I kind of sought out truth, I'd say really that's what it was. I sought out truth, and I actually started from a place of cynicism when it came to sort of supernatural and otherworldly things. By the time I hit my 20s, I had convinced myself that it was complete poppycock, complete bullshit. And actually, I probably set out to disprove it more than anything else, and found myself just, overwhelmed by coincidences and terrible incidences as well, that seemed to just come out of nowhere, or that were really outlandish compared to the experiences of my peers. And I think that's what it was for me when I sort of realized, I don't think I am the exact same as everyone else around me. I think there might be something a little bit different going on here. And maybe when I started to loosen up my stance a bit, that's when I started looking more into things like astrology. And, planetary effects was something that kind of made sense to me. And I know it still kind of gets brushed off as pseudoscience. And as much as I consider you my astrologer priestess friend, you also would have your issues with astrology too. So I want to discuss those some more as we get on through the conversation too. Also, I did want to say at the top of this interview that we are going to talk a little bit later on about Bairavee's predictions for 2022 as well, because we're all kind of waiting with bated breath to see what this next year is going to bring for us. But first, we have to kind of look back to decide where we're going to go next. So we're talking about, finding your way in the world, finding your niche, find the thing that feels fulfilling for you to do with your life. And you find ways to help, and you find ways to talk to people. And then the next thing is, for an awful lot of us, you kind of get a bit too into doing it, and you start giving too much of yourself away to other people. And that's something I notice doesn't really get covered an awful lot when people are talking about, giving to your community and giving of yourself. Is that they don't always mention the stop button, the line when you should stop giving of yourself. And a lot of us have maybe learned that the hard way. What have your experiences been of that, Bairavee?
Well, it's a good question. I'll give you some context. So 2012, I submitted my PhD. It was like 111,000 words. It was the weight of a newborn. I still remember giving it away. It was tough. And 2013, I was back in Malaysia, and I was, suffering from some disability at the time, and I didn't know what to do. And one day I just woke up and I knew I could do astrology. And that's the thing about me. People come to me because I didn't learn astrology. Mm-hmm. I literally woke up one day knowing how to do it. Mm-hmm. So, and it wasn't the way other people did it. It was a thing that I don't think there's still a word for yet. And then I started off on Facebook initially. That platform I continued using for something like 7 years, had like 30,000 regular followers and so on, a couple of pages. And I spent most of my time building community, and I gave as much as I humanly could, So that was my experience. I just gave and gave and gave. And when it came time for it to start as a business, I started with readings, which I felt comfortable offering. And in my case, I felt that people could see, because I didn't hide it from them. At least I don't do that now. They can actually see the effort it takes to do this work, whether it's giving a reading, whether it's talking about the year, whether it's consoling someone online because someone they love has just died. This takes work. And the community, especially the ones that followed me after I left Facebook because of censorship, my work got very political, very trans-friendly, which is a very important thing to me, very respectful of BIPOC, minority rights, indigenous concerns, the attempts at the work that needs to be done towards decolonizing the mind and spirit of humanity. As those took up more space in my work, I realized I needed to shift platform. And the people around me seem to understand that I can't give as much as I did anymore. But that has meant that more people have started stepping up, realizing the value of the work and deciding to invest in it. And that took 8 years. For myself, health concerns have been the biggest limiting factor in how much I could give. But it is no joke. It is the very solemn reminder that if you continue to give without limits, even looking at your own natural limits as a human being, you will also create a culture where people feel entitled to take without limits. And I realized that culture amongst the people who followed my work shifted when I dared to put reasonable limits to sustain my livelihood and that of my family. And the right people stayed, and a lot of the users left. So that was my experience.
So again, having to be like a rolling stone and gathering no moss, having to uproot everything and move to a new platform and all of that for your own protection.
Pretty much. I lost like tens of thousands of people, but it was also at a time where people started to use Facebook more as a space to shoot venom at others rather than actually build community. And people got very triggered by the trans thing. And I needed a fresh start. So now I have an awesome group of people, most of whom are activists and practitioners, most of whom recognize that every human being is a human being and the gender binary is part of the colonial mindset, and who realize that the cutting edge of spirituality comes when we are willing to break that down. And as we are willing to break that down, we need to recognize the humanity inherent in each person that is not defined by their secondary sexual characteristics. But it is a process, and it takes a lot to do it. But I made the decision one day, and bam, it happened.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so for people watching this, Bairavee, who are kind of going, oh God, I don't know if that's me or not, is that my path, or is this something I'm meant to be doing? Am I a witch? Do I want to live that life? How much of it do you think is coming from the place of being someone who reads the stars and the messages that they have for us, like how much of it do you think is sort of predetermined? I know it's a big question, but how much of it do we come into the world with?
Well, I believe that anything can be changed. And I feel that a lot of the people who are mystics, priestesses, witches, warlocks, psychics of any kind and any gender, I believe they come into this world because they do have a karmic imprint of doing this job from a previous time. However, that does not mean that you have to do this job.
Yeah.
It simply means that there is a natural compulsion to do it. And I am not someone who would advise someone to do something just because of karma. It's like the soulmate story. Just because you shagged someone 10,000 moon cycles ago does not mean you have to do the same thing again, especially if that asshole has not learned his lesson.
Yes.
And I would actually apply the same thing to our relationship with facilitation. In absolute truth, and I don't know how you're going to respond to this. I mean, whether it's a witch, whether it's a priestess, I feel that we are doing this at this time in this space because this space needs to be held right now. But within 20 or 30 years, with the shifts on this planet, I hope we will not need that word. I hope that we will all be going into a space naturally, effortlessly, and gracefully where we come straight to spirit. But until the work of clearing the old has finished, we will still need this middle space for those who are called on the path. Now, just because you get a call, does that mean you need to do it? No, it does not. Because I get a lot of people, because they see me, they're like, I was thinking about being a priestess. And I'm like, honey, it's overrated. Tell me, what do
Yeah.
you really? And they'll tell me, and it'll have nothing to do with priestessing.
Yeah.
Just because some aspect of your past lives liked doing this in a particular way does not mean that is who you are.
Yes.
So the easiest answer to that question is, if you feel a calling with the person you are in the here and now, living in this reality in the here and now, if you feel the calling to do it here, now, not because of what was before, then explore it.
Yes.
I mean, there is a much deeper reason for my statement there. And a lot of it has to do with the shifting of the ages. And that's something that I've been talking years about. And a lot of people are talking about the age of Aquarius, but you know what? People actually blur Pisces and Aquarius a lot. Because when the phrase came into being, there was actually a lot more Pisces energy in the sky.
Yeah.
So people kind of have conflated the two.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
when we move into an Aquarian consciousness, we are no longer glorifying the idea that the priestess or witch or facilitator has to be sacrificed or ground up in order to provide someone else a service.
Yes.
And if you can facilitate from that space where you are not the punching bag, then do it. Otherwise, you're creating a template for someone else to follow in those footsteps, and those are not footsteps worth following if they involve the sacrifice of any innocent. That would be
Yes.
my answer.
Yes.
And we are innocents, just to be clear.
Yeah. Most of the time, Bairavee. Most of the time.
I'm pretty sure you would not intentionally do something like that. Not unless someone deserved it.
Now you're talking. I think one of the other things myself and Bairavee have in common, and that we probably like most about each other, is the no bullshit approach to spirituality, but life in general, really, and everything in it. And we both understand the importance of finding humor in things as well. That's probably one of my own biggest coping mechanisms, probably, that I've developed over the years. But yeah, I suppose, well, back on to our own paths, really, and where we came from. What for you was, do you know, like, your early life was so academic, and it was books, 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 and like, how did the universe get your attention? Or what was the kind of confirmation, the moment of knowing for you, when you kind of went, okay, there actually might be forces larger than me at work here?
Well, for me, the thing is, it was never an external thing. I always grew up with it. So people noticed when I was a baby, if someone was going to die, I would cry my head off and I would not let them step in the house because I was seeing something. And they noticed if anyone hid things from me, I would have dreams. And I'd be like, what is this about? So, it was growing up amongst a bunch of supposed atheists, and me just knowing things that they had no idea how, I was supposed to know those things. So they tried turning me to religion, which really did not work at all. Um, that's a different story.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for me, it was never like a separate reality. It was always just there. And I think even till today, I don't think I fully appreciate how different my world has always been vis-a-vis a muggle.
Yeah.
It's like, if you've never gone to the movie theaters and seen the energies of things floating about, are you even alive?
Yes.
So
Yes, I suppose. I mean, it's like, it brings you to worlds of, like, mental health and physical health, and it's very, very real for those of us walking the path. Let's put it that way.
yeah.
And we have to be very good at dancing the line between things like that. My language for spirituality when I was a child was religion. That was my first sort of solid introduction to things larger than myself, as probably a lot of Irish people's experience would have been at the time. Catholicism was all the rage, and they tried to make it penetrate sort of every aspect of your life. But I didn't really feel that much of a connection with it. It was just like a gate that you had to get through in order to get to the next milestone in your life. But I think a big realization for me, or something maybe that was working on deep levels I didn't quite understand as a child, but that brought me comfort as well, is that I would have had dreams of heaven and hell. Like I would have had a sense of, you know, there being other entities and things outside of myself, but I was so busy gaslighting myself as a child and kind of going, no, that you're just playing, it's just games, it's not real. And even when it started to feel real, I'd be like, no, you know. And there was, I didn't really put it too much out into the world, so there was nobody kind of encouraging me that way and taking me seriously. And it's maybe just as well, because I had to learn to socialize with the other kids and with normal people then, you know. But the dreams for me, I think, you know, I would have had dreams where I saw myself sort of walking down on the path into hell, and sometimes walking with people that I knew, and having to kind of consciously decide. I suppose there were some of my first lucid dream experiences as well. Having to decide to turn around and walk away from that path, and to leave, you know, my friend or my peer or my person that I knew behind me, because that was their decision. And being quite young, having dreams like that, and then having more reassuring ones where I met God one time in my dream. You know, sometimes my path in my dream would go down and sometimes it would go up, which I find was eerily similar to what I learned then for kind of journeying techniques when you're going journey into other realms and things like that. So when I go up, then it was obviously a sense of a place more like heaven, but without all that Catholic judgment and guilt and things like that. It was just like a sense of understanding and things finally making sense and things being okay, and me being okay as a person, that some reassurance for me that I wasn't all that bad. The one time I met God in a dream like that, he said he was watching football on a big projector screen and playing foosball on a table, and I felt a little bit like a sort of an outsider at first, because as a child all of my friends would have been like, you had to pick a side. Did you support Man United or Liverpool? And I didn't care at all about football, but you still had to pick the team, you know. This was my trying to fit in. And when God asked me who I supported, I lied and said Man United. I think, and I think that's who he said he supported too. But it was kind of like, you know, you're okay, and God is different from you. But he likes you and he's invited you up here into his space, and there was no middleman. I think that was also another very important lesson for me, was that I didn't need to go through another human being in order to get my connection with the divine, you know, and that divine father sort of energy that we would have been taught about as children. So I think that was probably a big revelation for me when I was young, was that I was being given this sort of sense of agency, even though, as you say, I didn't really have the language and I didn't really have anyone confirming it for me. But there were always these little signposts, like little breadcrumbs along the way to just get me through to the next stage. When things were hard, maybe something would come up. And, you know, I remember to get going out to say the rosary in a field with a bull when I was a child as well, and just knowing that the bull wouldn't hurt me. And my mom let me, she knew what I was doing. So maybe she thought I'd be grand as well. And it was, you know, it was just as well. But these were the ways, like, I wanted to see what happened if I sat on a hilltop and said all of my prayers one after the other, and, you know, and just sat in the same field as a bull, this thing that we were taught to be frightened of as children. So learning to walk into my fear as well, and having that kind of work out for me. I think probably the next thing I learned, I want to ask you about that too, is that as you're learning these lessons when you go through life, especially if you're learning them the hard way, like we did in so many cases, you're having to, it's like a series of like miniature deaths. Like you're always dying and being reborn and coming back a new person. And I suppose the same could be said about us all, just as human beings. But I suppose when you're making big changes and you're working on many, many, many levels, it can be very, very draining. And I know that's something that you have experienced in particular, Bairavee. Do you think that ever gets any better? Do you think it ever improves? Does it only get worse? What's your experience of it?
I know that my experience has been, even amongst facilitators, facilitators look at me and they don't understand how I do what I do for so many people and yet get hit so hard. And they keep trying to point it at me, and I go, no, I've done all the right things. I don't have any of these self-limiting attitudes, victim martyr bullshit thing. What is going on? And I had to learn from finally a useful mentor whom I revere deeply. And, he basically helped me understand that the road is different for everybody. Some people who connect with God will basically see it as a walk through the park. Some people will have to face the down below day in and day out and clear the path for others. We are all working on different things. So the short answer is I don't think there is a generalizable answer to that. The long answer is I think that in our search for something, when we have found the thing, I hope things will actually become easier because that resistance will no longer be as necessary. I find that a lot of the resistance is put in my way, especially when I'm trying to do something to expand, to grow, that will actually help people. Like a lot of people don't know this, but I get attacked a lot by my clients, even the people who absolutely adore me, because there are lots of things on them that do not want them to get help. So sometimes I can get knocked out for a week before I see a particular client, but I still have to push through because I know that person is not going to find someone else they trust enough to help them help themselves in that situation. And that's probably one of the reasons why people have been so loyal to the work that I do, because I take it as a vocation. Is it easy? No. Would I like to stop doing it? Eventually, yes. I think I'd probably just want to set up shop, be an artist, sit with my baby, who is my cat, and, watch the world go by, knowing that I have finished what I came here to do. I mean, and as I was telling you when we were prepping these questions, whoever wants to know anything about me can go and look at my LinkedIn profile. We don't need to take up time with that. I have done enough work that a person would have done at the age of 60 in their career. And I feel like, for me at least, it just feels like it's just around the corner. And then I can find that space of peace. I don't mean dying. I mean having a space of peace in this reality. But that's what I keep listening for. And, and the most important thing is there are friends, there's allies. For me, family is my brother and our two little cat girls, our core family. And we have that support.
Yes.
And we have the people who love us. And as long as we have that, and as long as our hearts are aligned to whatever this thing is that we are searching for, I don't know about whether the resistance ever goes down, but you keep on that path. Because once you get on this road, it's addictive in a certain way. Not because of power or shit. I could not care less about external power. But it's like the truer you get with your heart, the less likely you are to settle for anything that is inconsistent with the truth of yourself. And that's hard, because when you do it, the person watching you goes, oh, wow, I can do that too. That's how you change the world. That's why there's so much resistance to people who actually make tremendous changes. Yeah. And they are often not the people with the biggest spotlight shown on them.
Yeah.
That's like, sometimes they're completely hidden. Sometimes they're people like you and me. And it is because when you actually allow yourself to walk in that uncompromising space of truth, the scary thing for a lot of the entities and energies that are holding this world in an unequal, imbalanced configuration, the scary thing for them is that more people will search for the truth, whether they agree with you or not. That's just the way the world works. When you emanate truth, you will want to inspire other people to do that, whatever their truth is. That's at least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, totally. I'd agree with you there. It's for me, it's like wanting to create a ripple effect, wanting to send ripples out into the world and possibly pass on a few torches as well, that, you know, that I can die happy knowing that somebody else will pick up where I left off. You know, I'd love to see younger people overtake me even in this kind of work. So I'm sure it's all coming. Like, the young people today are great, you know.
Oh my
They're
God,
adapting amazingly well to the shit show that they've been left. So, I mean, talking about resistance there, when you're talking about the entities, the energies, all of the things that will get in your way. And some of the time, you know, they are things that are in your birth chart as well. And we'll talk about that in a second. But just I was curious, like, how often do you find yourself what I'd refer to as weather waxing it, which is Granny Weather Wax in Terry Pratchett's Discworld books. And she reminds, is it Tiffany Aching or somebody, that in order to not be afraid in the forest, that you have to feel quite sure that you are the most frightening thing in there. And, you know, that's something that I definitely know I need reminding of sometimes. And I have to remind myself of that, whether it's, you know, sometimes I do it with, I feel overwhelmed by daily tasks and commitments that I've set for myself and things like that. And knowing that I can do it, and knowing that I'm just going to be pure stubborn and not let the fear of that overtake me. Like, I know that's something you have to do sometimes too. And how often do you find yourself doing that now? And do you think it'll stop if you ever do make it to something resembling retirement?
Is the question about finding the courage to be the scariest thing in the forest?
No, well, it's about how often do you have to draw upon that? Like, you know, I definitely know it's a useful tool for a witch to have in her arsenal, or for anybody who's priestess and are walking a path like this, especially if they're working with community, is that there's going to be energies coming from all over the place. A lot of the time it's nothing to even do with you, but it's going to come at you because you're trying to be a conduit for something for your community. You know, would you find that you get attacked by people, stuff like that? You know, when you're saying that it happens to you a lot, are we talking several times a week? Are we talking, you know, on a real exit? And does it ever really get to you in an existential kind of way? Like, oh my God, this might be bigger than me.
I mean, it's always bigger than me. It's always bigger than me. Point number one. Anyone doing good in this world, I mean, doing real good in this world, faces this challenge. Not just people who work in the spiritual medium. Anyone who is genuinely helping the world faces some kind of resistance somewhere. What I find is, I mean, I know the approach that you speak of. I tried that approach for many years. For people who don't know, the name Bairavee actually was given to me by an accident. The people who named me didn't know what it actually meant. And most of them think that it's a scale, a Carnatic scale. It's a very beautiful scale. It's very complex and melancholy. But the name Bairavee in Hinduism, which I am not a proponent of, because I looked at those energies and the roots of them and just kind of went, you people are on the old system. Do you want me to work with you? Evolve. That's about it. And I spent many, many years pilgrimaging in India. But in that system, Bairavee is actually the energy of the goddess Mahakali in her most terrifying form, because she's the great destroyer. And that was the energy I carried with me till about recently. I think, I mean, right now I'm 35, if I'm adding this right. Yeah, we're 36 in late 2022, so 35 right now. I would say for me, letting go of that was what actually helped me on my path. Because I hear where you're coming from. And a lot of the times that really does help. As I was not really knowing what I was doing, I always felt the need to summon that courage up. But something changed for me. I remember when I was in Nepal one day, I was sitting by myself at night whilst my brother and the tour guide were going to walk up the mountains. And like Kung Fu Panda, I hate staircases. I despise staircases. Okay, I would try my best to climb a hill, but I would actually feel more prejudice towards it if it had a staircase.
Yeah.
But So I'm sitting at night, and all of a sudden, I mean, it was sunset, but all of a sudden it became night. And then I realized there was something in the forest with me. And it wasn't anything supernatural. It was a tiger. So it's me all by myself on this hill in Nepal, and I can hear the tiger. And I was praying at the time. Now I think that was one of the most defining moments for me, because I did the only thing I could do. I was praying before the tiger arrived, and I just kept praying, and he left me be. Yeah. And for me, I have actually found that when you have the courage to be deeply loving and deeply compassionate to something that is pure, that is threatening, sometimes it's purely malevolent, sometimes it's just a threat. But when you actually approach things from a space of deep compassion, you can actually find a different way. So yes. I think the way I have survived all of this is realizing that personally, for me, the first approach didn't work, because I didn't want to fight the tiger in the forest.
Yeah. Well, you were definitely going to lose.
It was more of, I am sitting here in my peace. It is very nice that you have come to visit me. See you. And that was kind of how I deal with a lot of the entities and a lot of the energies, even from people. There's obviously you can't always deal with things in a peaceful and compassionate way, because sometimes things are just obsessed and flat out evil. Yeah. Or just people, just mean.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's times for stubbornness, there's times for putting it down. Thinking about it now, you have me wondering, did I go the other way about it? Like, I was all full of compassion and connection for that bull, and there wasn't a bother on us. But as I got up, then I had to learn to put on my Doc Marten boots and go stomping, like, you know.
You need both.
Well, I think it's about coming back round to a balance then in the end, really, isn't it? That's the point of it, you know.
You gotta have compassion, and you gotta have courage. Because I have found that in the way I used to handle things in the past, yeah, sure, I could. It reminds me of the tarot card, the Five of Swords. You know, the Pyrrhic victory, where you see the one man standing with the sword, and he has won, but has he truly won?
Yes.
You know, so sometimes that kind of showdown is absolutely required, because someone may not be, someone may be using underhanded tactics. Someone may be pushing you into an all or nothing situation. But I actually find that is a minority of the time for most people. But there are certainly circumstances where, yeah, you absolutely have to put those boots on and kick hard.
Yeah. And you had mentioned about Kali Ma and kind of coming away from holding that energy of deifying different energies, different archetypes, different gods or goddesses. Have you yourself ever had an altar, Bairavee?
Yeah, I did when I was a child. When, they were trying to help. So they introduced me to religion. So I had an altar. I spent hours at my altar. I did all of that stuff. And eventually I realized two things. One, it is not the altar that is sacred. It is the intention that is sacred. You do not need any real tools to connect with spirit. The most important thing is your love. That's point number 2. You do not need an idol. You do not need a name. You do not need anything beyond that pure intention. And that's also a very Pratchett thing.
Yes. Now, being able to be resourceful with what you have around you without actually hoarding props, as I'd refer to them, spiritual props, and attaching weight and power to them over yourself.
It's not to dismiss people who do have altars, because there are people who love their altars, and I can see it as the great experiences of community and culture and ancestry and tradition. But it is to say that it doesn't have to be the only way that is done. Because when you have an altar, over time, whatever you touch will acquire a life and consciousness of its own. That's why people invest power into statues and objects.
Yes.
And you have to be very careful with what you're investing into.
Yes.
So having an altar is perfectly fine if you want to be elaborate about it, or if you want to be simple about it. I'm a minimalist when it comes to things. If, in case people hadn't noticed, But when it comes to spiritual work, I would say I'm very much a minimalist. I do love gemstones. I feel that they help us connect. But as I found out once, I was supposed to go on this pilgrimage to see sacred sites of the Magdalene, and my passport got stolen. I got stranded in Barcelona, completely disrupted my pilgrimage. Instead, I went to see the Black Madonna, which was interesting.
Mm.
But I felt that there were a lot of unhappy energies that were in that area whilst I was sitting with the uncertainty of not knowing what to do because I'd never lost my passport before. And as someone who's been traveling since the age of 16, for me, my passport is always felt like an extension of my person.
Mm.
So, and I felt vulnerable without it. So what I did was I went to a little convenience store, and they had these little stones that you put in aquariums, because I couldn't get gemstones. I was too scared to even go anywhere. It was just not a good situation. And I charged them, and I used them as things to grid myself and so on, and it worked. And what I noticed with gemstones is in my work, because things get extraordinarily focused, because as you know, when I speak to someone, it ain't just about what's happening in their life. It can even come up with things that have lasted for thousands of years.
Mm.
So gemstones, much as electronics, do not always work well with me. They will literally crack.
Mm.
Be like, I'm out. I'm done, sister. That's why I don't use them so often. But I found that the stones, the very simple, common stones that you find that you
Mm.
use to go and decorate the aquarium with, they actually retained a charge because I put so much of intention in there. Months later, didn't need to clear them. They were still, I could feel that zing.
Yeah.
And to me, that was one of a big revelatory moment that just helped me realize more so that I do not need something that is external to myself. And that's not saying that I'm like glorifying me. It is to say that I'm already a conduit here.
Mm.
You don't need a conduit on top of a conduit on top of a conduit. Keep it as simple as possible and open your heart as wide as possible. That's the most important thing about any kind of spiritual work.
Yeah. Like spending money is not required to engage with
Not at
spirituality
all.
or to carry out magic or anything like that. I would I did when I was sort of starting back on this path in maybe my mid-20s, um, was working about with crystals and things like that. But I very quickly I kept feeling this like super heavy energy off them, and maybe it's just me, but I learned then about ley lines and things like that, and that quarrying for these crystals like create serious trauma to the land. I know there are ethically gathered ones as well. You can gather quartz from rivers and things like that. So I wouldn't be opposed to that in the same way. But actually blasting and digging the earth and, putting human people in danger to make a few bucks doesn't ring well with me at all. But like that, stones from the earth, like there is nothing that can teach you to be unmovable and sort of confident like a lump of granite. We have a lot of granite here in Ireland. I've lived
Yeah.
on mountains made of granite, and I probably developed skills just by living on it. So I find the
Agree.
actual the geological strata that you're actually
Yes.
living on top of is one of the most powerful things that you can plug into. I mean, it is its own kind of energy, like the sky has its energy
Absolutely.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you can take it down as close to basics as you like. I don't judge people at all for using the props. I think it is a little bit unsafe for people to feel as though they rely on their physical material tools in order to do the work that they need to do, because it's you. It has to be coming from you, or coming through you, and it really helps if you can do that even when you haven't got your props on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I've had to, but I've been thrown into quite a few situations where I had to learn that.
Mm.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love my gemstones, but I've been feeling uncomfortable with the idea. So whenever I buy some now, I'm like, oi, do you actually want to come with me, or shall I just leave you where you are?
Yeah.
So I find that works.
Yes, and that's a good tip. I don't know if we haven't mentioned it in this conversation, but if you are picking things from nature, as well, you should definitely be discerning there too. Don't destroy eco habitats. Going out and lifting, lots of stones from the one place or anything like that. I tend not to lift from sacred sites either and things like that as well.
Bad idea.
But if you find a pebble in your path or a twig on your walk, feel free to ask it, does it want to come with you? And maybe ask any guardians that might be, kind of hanging around the place. Are they okay with you taking it too? And you just always want to check and double check and triple check, because you never know what's going to follow you home, Bairavee. Sure you don't.
No, thank you. Been there, done that.
Yeah. Got a whole suitcase full of t-shirts as you. So it's probably a good time to ask, where can people actually look up their birth charts, Bairavee? Because we're about to talk a little bit about astrology and that. And for me personally, and I'm sure maybe some of the people watching, astrology is something I find very difficult to penetrate. At the same time, I find it incredibly useful. So, when I need answers, when I find things are just all getting a bit weird or a bit stressful, and I'm looking for a bigger context to put onto it, I'll usually click over to Bairavee's channel and see if she has offered up some of that information for her community that week. And very often she will have done. So that's another way I know we're on a very similar wavelength. It always seems to be good timing. So yeah, where can people go if they're a bit like me and a bit useless at astrology and they want to have a look at their birth chart and maybe put it into some perspective? Can you recommend like some websites, or just give us a bit of an outline, say for complete beginners? Tell us just roughly what we're talking about.
All right, now 2 websites that are really good are www.astro.com. They'll give you the pie. To me, it just looks like a pie. Sometimes the pies are evenly sliced and sometimes the houses are unevenly sliced. But that's where you see the chart. www.astro.com. You just put in your birth data and you'll get an image of it. You can also go to cafeastrology.com, because it's another good site, especially for beginners, for people who are wanting to just understand the basic language. For me, it's important to just get a grasp of the basics, but to also remember that the soul and the spirit is always going to be greater than the chart. It's just a guide.
Yes.
And when you are going on further and further and further on your path and your road, you actually need to use different techniques to see it. Because otherwise you'll just get stuck in a very narrow, straight-jacketed way of seeing things. So think of it as the footprint of a baby at its exact time of birth. That you can infer a lot of things from that footprint, but you can't know everything. So that's point number 1. For the basics, go there, but just remember things can and will shift. You are not bound to it. That is why astrology is actually part of the control matrix, because every religion uses it. Because an astrologer wields an enormous power over another human being. Like I had my life dictated to me by terrible astrologers. I did not like them one bit, which is why, despite my cultural origins, I do not use that system, because it never resonated with me. It never actually showed me the path to my growth. If anything, it kept trying to put me in a box. So, as long as you can say this is a guideline and there are many different ways of reading this, you should be okay. Now, if you're trying to figure out, if you're confused in life, look at what Jupiter and Saturn are doing that year. This is like very hands-on, very easy thing. It's easy to look at where Jupiter is. Where is Jupiter in 2022? Where is Saturn in 2022? That's it. That's all you really need to know, in all honesty. Because people confuse themselves with astrology. I use more than 200 bodies in astrology. But I very rarely go into most of them, because that's not the level of detail people actually need. They just need to come back to the basics. What am I doing in the here and now? So if you want, we can one more thing before I get into that. Another really useful thing for people to know is that their sun sign is not at all the complete picture of them. It is a dominant trait or a dominant approach. And that too can change as the soul evolves. That's one of the reasons why a lot of facilitators come to me, because I recognize that. Like, I
Yes.
will always have certain traits that are very Capricornian, but when I get into my spiritual work and space, I don't function like that at all.
Mm.
Right? It's just the starting point. A good thing for you to also know is where your ascendant is, because that will give you an impression of how you see yourself, and to some extent, how other people see you in the world. It's more so that first impression that a person has when they look at you. I'll use myself as an example. I have a Cancer rising. So it's very nurturing, very tender, very maternal. So when people see me, they see mommy. But my sun is in Capricorn, so that's close to my descendant. So when they actually come into conversation with me, there they say, "Oh shit, she means business. I am not going to get hugs and cuddles here. She is going to ask me to do shit." But that ascendant is what kind of packages and frames so much of the way you engage with another person. So learn that as well. Honestly, I can tell more about a person from their ascendant than their actual sun sign, because that tells me at the level of the conscious mind, what road are you most likely to pick? Like, for example, a Capricorn with a Leo ascendant is going to be very different than a Capricorn with a Taurus ascendant. They may both be very, very hardworking and ambitious towards certain goals, but one will be looking for material security and one will be looking for security by validation and approval through some act of expression. So in that way, the ascendant actually has a lot more to teach you. Look at the ascendant. Even if you're looking at those horoscopes, read the ascendant and read your sun sign, and that will actually give you more information.
Brilliant.
Makes sense?
Perfect, yeah. And what as well would you say to people who do start digging into their birth charts and go, "Oh my God, there's so much like crap things in here"?
I'm definitely one of those people.
Me too, bye.
Definitely, yeah, I believe you. I'm
Yeah.
definitely one of those people. What I would say is that remember that a chart was not made by God, or whatever your word for creator, creatrix, or source is. It is a human, earthly representation of what energies were coming into you at the moment you were born. That does not tell you what you are now. It does not tell you what you can become. And even if you were born with a shit chart, you can actually do a lot more with it than a person who has a quote unquote good chart. Because if you don't take opportunities when they present themselves to you, even the person with the so-called best chart can get absolutely lost. And as someone with a totally shit chart in many ways, I am living proof and testament that yes, you can get a lot done if you are willing to look at the opportunity when it comes and to take that opportunity.
Yeah.
Make
So in a
sense?
way, it can be a great opportunity to learn lessons that you need to learn, or to overcome obstacles that you need to. But at the same time, again, the glorification of martyrdom, it's not the be all and end all. To you shouldn't associate yourself with always just permanent crap. With that's all I'm ever going to have, because there's crap in my chart. You shouldn't limit yourself that way, because it's like any other resource. It's just about what you do with it, really, isn't it?
It's like a weather report.
Mm-hmm.
There shall be this time. Bring an umbrella.
Yeah.
Less likely to have rain. Wear your shorts and some flip-flops and go to the beach.
Yeah.
Just insofar as that. Now, of course, when I do astrology with someone, when I do a reading, I am a surgeon. Like, I can go straight into an experience, pinpoint what happened, how it happened, why it happened, what was the underlying energy of the day, in cases of births, deaths, unexplicable instances, but I am using it as a surgeon. And if you want to do that level of astrology, forget about having a normal life.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, I don't even need to look at a chart anymore. In fact, I've never really needed to. I kind of will already get the download before I even touch the chart. So these days, I'll be like, did this happen? Okay, that's your problem. Go, here's a partial refund. Next.
Yes.
What I find, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more people on your channel who are more towards the mystical arts. Sometimes mystics want to learn astrology because they think that it will give them more. And I basically just tell them, if you are a clear channel, do not muddy the waters.
Yes.
Astrology tries to do with the mind what the heart and spirit need to be doing anyway. It is an intellectual attempt at understanding spirit, but that's all it is. It's a scaffolding.
Yeah.
But when you
It's
are actually in tune, you'll know. When you're actually in tune with deep creator, creatrix, deep earth, deep spirit, call it what you want, you don't actually need anyone to tell you anything.
Yes.
A lot of the time, I think that people just show up because they know that when they talk to me, I give them the space to be able to dig deeper to that part of themselves. The astrology I've always considered to be a bit of a window dressing.
Yes.
Because what's actually happening is that people are learning to tune into that self.
Yes. It's interesting you keep making weather analogies because that would have been, I sort of had down as a topic to cover, like, for people who just can't really gel with astrology, but they want another way of like that, sort of explaining their past, understanding their present, and maybe making some guesses at their future, like seeing what's coming up. And actually, I would have said to literally look at the weather, to literally watch the weather, because you can understand, like yourself, even if there's a heavy rainstorm coming, it changes the whole energy of the rest of your day. And that probably would have been a way that I would have approached it more so, because I just can't astrology. I need to have somebody telling it to me. I've gone and looked up my birth chart, and I don't remember the things. I don't retain the information at all. So for me, it's weather, and it's quite important for me, if at all possible, to see the sky as often as possible in my life. Because I like to know what weather is coming up. I like to at least feel like I have a bit of a handle on what's coming up later that day, and I'd be quite good at guessing from, the speed a cloud is moving at and the very slight change in its color, what it is going to do for the rest of the day. So I suppose the thing is like that, to find the thing, that you find helps you to become a clear channel for maybe what your intuition already knows, the energy that's in the air, to bring all those things together. Some people use tea leaves, there's a million different ways, I suppose, to tap into it. Astrology is just a very popular one, but it's also a very misunderstood one too. Like that's one thing I've really gained from watching you, listening to you on your channel, Bairavee, and just being your friend over the years, is that it's not it's not the most effective use of it to, just look up your zodiac at that page in the newspaper every day or every week, because you're not really engaging with it that way yourself. It's just like that. It's the priest kind of playing the middleman and telling you, and like that, I still tune in to listen to the weather, the spiritual weather with Dr. Bairavee Balasubramanium. But I have my own ways of telling, what's coming up for me that day, and reading patterns in my life and reading patterns in my own energy, even to know kind of where I'm at and stuff like that. So I suppose on that note then, since people have found their birth charts now, and they've come back to us with a cup of tea, can you tell us, can you break it to us gentle, Bairavee, what's coming up for us this year in 2022?
All right. Well, first of all, for me, like I said, the two most important things you need to know is what's Jupiter doing and what's Saturn doing. Okay. Now, the thing is, Jupiter, and people make a big fuss about retrogrades. It's ridiculous. Every year we have multiple retrogrades. The only real if Mercury is doing something, Mars is doing something, Venus is doing something, then pay attention. Yeah. Because every year you're going to have Jupiter in retrograde, you're going to have Uranus in retrograde, you're going to have Saturn in retrograde. For those of you wondering what a retrograde is, it just means for the earthbound observer, it looks like the planet is going backwards. But that's because of the planet itself is not doing the whoop. So, those are basic things to consider. Point number one. So don't worry about retrogrades. Unless it's Mercury, then please do back up your files because that shit is real.
Yeah.
Um, but in fact, right now, as we speak, we're already in a Venus retrograde, right? So I'll give you like just the way we're starting off this year. Venus is already in retrograde, meaning it's moving relative to the earthbound observer. It's moving in reverse. Venus will be stationing direct, which means it looks like it's not moving in reverse anymore on the 29th of January. So what that means in English is that this month is all about review, review, review. Venus is doing all of this in the sign of Capricorn. Look at your relationships, look at your businesses, look at your resources, look at your long-term goals, your ambition, your vocation, your career. Look at the way you integrate the understanding, the embodiment of the feminine principle in all of the above. And review. Those of you who have sisters or people who hold that very close energy to you would also want to be doing things with that vibration and frequency. Sometimes you get opportunities to do that with people from your past. There can also be a lot of attempted reconciling with exes at this time. Not that I would always recommend it, but there's a lot of energy of the past that is coming back that is asking us to look at things. So that's where we are starting now, just at this year. Now, the big deal for me is jumping to something larger. Like if you were to ask me, what is the key signifier of this year? What is the one thing that I would want everyone to remember is that Jupiter is going to be doing its thing in Pisces. Now, I know people say Jupiter is a giver of blessings and benevolence, but if you, like me, and I'm sure you do, but if you have any understanding of Greek and Roman mythology, yeah, he definitely spread his blessings around a fair bit to quite a lot of women. So, but effectively, he was the patriarch of the skies. And in that from the time in which these understandings were imported, it was always a big thing to have the blessings of the patriarch on your side. But it's really just expansion and growth. And I don't want to continue the male narrative there, but you get what I mean. You can't really have growth all the time. Someone's going to die. But effectively, Jupiter just expands everything that it touches. So as Jupiter is in Pisces this year, and there will be a period where it is in Aries. This is what it does. It speeds through and then it reverses slowly and then it speeds through again. But for a lot of the year, it's going to be in the sign of Pisces. It means that we are going to be needing to look at exactly what we have been talking about in this interview, which is why I asked you to restructure it when you approached me with the questions, because it's going to be all of Piscean shit. It's going to be about karma. It's going to be about spirit. It's going to be about faith. It's going to be about leading with that space that aligns with an energy that is greater than yourself rather than the head. And the biggest challenge, I would say, for people right now is everyone wants something to hold on to, whether they call it a guide, whether they call it a friend, whether they call it a guru, whether they call it big bearded man in the sky. They want something to hold on to, something that says, I'm going to save you. But the moment we actually approach spirit from that place where we are looking, we are hungry for that connection, that's where we get a lot of illusions in. That's where we get a lot of glamours in. So sometimes people can think that they're praying to spirit or they're calling in this archangel and that god and this goddess, but it can be a mimicry or an echo of that energy because the person is too hungry for that connection. Connect with spirit, yes, but connect to it from a space that is not seeking to devour, is not seeking to control, is not seeking to own. A lot of that warning comes from the South Node in Scorpio, because there's a lot of that energy that's also going to be about in 2022. When you are praying, when you are aligning, when you are connecting, ask whatever benevolent energy it is that you work with to help you build something that is sustainable, not just for yourself, but for others. That's the lesson of the North Node in Taurus, to build something that is gradual, that is benevolent, not just for yourself, but for whatever community you're a part of or whatever earthly resource that you need to make this workable. something that actually allows you to have your five senses in full operation and have a decent life, something that maybe isn't all flashy and exciting, but again comes from a space of stability. And that's what people really need to be looking for this year, given Jupiter in Pisces and the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. Another thing that we need to listen to is very much the lessons of Saturn. Now, Saturn, well, there's a lot I can talk about, but I am just talking about the most important things that I think people can actually take as an actionable lesson. Saturn in Aquarius reminds us that what we are looking for is not just about benefiting the self, but in a way that empowering yourself also empowers people around you or energies around you. A way that actually says, yes, you need to be compensated, but so too does everyone that you have worked with. Something that says, yes, you need to be helped, but as you are able to stand in that position, help others as you can, and to create these networks of communities that are not built on dependency, but rather built on genuine altruism. And it is about creating structures like that I think is going to be the focus for everyone in one way or another. You don't all have to be at the top of an organization doing that. You can be a part of it in some way. Even if it's in running your own business, try and hire someone from a group that gets overlooked, or try and offer, if you can, if it's something that you can do, try and offer a more affordable option. Try and do something that actually creates that larger network of abundance, but that still fulfills your needs. And more importantly, comes from a space that is aligned with who you are. The worst thing that people can do this year is to let their fears and their anxieties and their desire to control to run away with all of this. Most of the time, people make, I'm not going to call it mistakes. There are certainly things that I've done in my past which I look at and go, oh dear God. But a lot of the time, people make decisions which they may later question because they are not coming from that place of faith. They are coming from the, oh God, what if I fuck this up? What if this all goes terribly wrong? Oh God, if I don't do this, what if that doesn't happen? I'm not saying go in without a plan, but I'm saying when you make decisions this year, make it from that space where you know you are so deep inside you are touching spirit. And that's honestly the most important spiritual practice, guideline, principle that I would encourage people to engage with for this year. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds like a very good heads up for the year to come. So I suppose when seeking connection, when seeking your path, or maybe the road back to your path, practice discernment.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but also, don't be afraid. Do it. Get up and make the move, make the change.
Yeah. You've already said a lot of shit. I don't really think there should be, too much to scare a lot of people. I mean, sometimes what people are afraid of is change itself. And this is not a year that is going to be very kind to people who are holding on to their own shit. Believe me, it is not fragrant.
Okay. So not 100% fire and brimstone, but again, it could be uncomfortable for a lot of people.
I think it would be uncomfortable. I mean, there is a point in the middle part of the year. Let me just see if I can get you the exact date. Because as fate would have it, my computer finally, for various reasons, decided that I needed to get a new one. So
we were just talking about that earlier. Technology just crapping out when you try to have a conversation between two sort of like spiritual people or people who delve a lot in energy stuff. Sometimes the tech just completely gives up, and you can imagine Bairavee's poor laptop trying to cope with all her charts and work. And
it doesn't go. Well, round about the end of July, so we are going to be seeing the North Node in the sky at 18 degrees of Taurus, conjunct what is known as the mean node. Some other people may use what is known as a true node, but it's not going to be too far apart from that time. Basically, Uranus is going to be with the North Node in the sign of Taurus in late July. That is going to be a very powerful time for people to break new ground in the way they find abundance and the way they think about finances and sustainability and the way they think about their bodies and their health and what brings them joy. And the thing is, if they are holding on to their old shit, that is going to be a very uncomfortable and unpleasant breakdown. Could be in finances, relationships, health, whatever. But the more gracefully you flow into what is that joyful space, the more likely you are to be shown a path by then. At least that's the way I would see it.
So 2022 really is going to be the year of out with the old and in with the new kind of thing.
A lot of that, yes, definitely a lot of that. And I think there's going to be a lot of resistance to it as well. And people are going to try to resist. Now, just because one thing I do want to clarify is that, and this is a body which I can safely say I am the only astrologer that actually looks into to some detail and depth. We are going to be seeing Therius, the hunter stalker, doing a lot of things with Jupiter through this year. Therius was what terrorized people in 2020. I predicted this before coronavirus became as world-changing as it did. It is an energy that deals a lot with covert fear, predation, and so on and so forth. And that dude is going to be constantly using that button of, oh, no, but I'm feeling insecure. I need to control this. I need to do this. It is in the sign of Virgo, of course. And that is going to be leading people to a lot of, again, decisions that they may not have wanted to have made if they had 2020 hindsight. So even if you think you're trying to fix the situation in the best way you know possible, know that sometimes the best thing to do is to not try and fix it. Sometimes it ain't your problem. Sometimes it is a case of patience and time. And that's one of the reasons why people run into different paths, different modes of facilitation, different learning tools like astrology. If you choose the wrong path, the wrong tool, or wrong teacher, what's supposed to save you can actually be the back door to something that ends up taking you on a path that makes it a lot longer. By all means, try to heal, try to find different perspectives on your life and situation. But remember that when something is almost like egging you on by raising a certain fear that you can't put your finger on, that's not a good space to make decisions from. Make sense?
100%. It's been very illuminating chatting with you, Bairavee. It's been very enjoyable. Will you tell us before you go where people can find all of your, where they can book a session with you, or where they can come in to find your astrological sort of weather reports, as you were calling them, when you talk to your community and that?
Well, the easiest thing to do is to just search for the Sky Priestess on Google. You can either find my website, which is theskypriestess.com, or you can find me on Instagram, which is at the Sky Priestess, which is where a lot of people find me, but most people on YouTube, because I don't just do the astrology there. More often, I do a kind of a community group space that's political, that's spiritual, that's all of those things, called Hello Neighbor. And people like listening to those. Yes. So if you want to find me, just look for the Sky Priestess on YouTube. If you like the vibe, you will stay, and if you don't, you won't.
Yes, absolutely. And for those who do stick around, there's a great sense of community in the space you have now on YouTube. I like being in there myself. I don't always contribute, and I don't always make the live on time as well, but I like watching it back after, and the live chat of, you interacting with the comments and the people who are in there. I think it's great. You're not just sitting up on YouTube sort of painting yourself like a guru to people. In fact, quite the opposite. Oh God, no. Quite the opposite. Thank you so much for joining me on the channel. Thank you all for joining us as well in my first interview, I think, of 2022. My first my first guest on for the year, Bairavee, and I'm delighted it was you. We've been talking a good bit over the Christmas, and yeah, I had almost forgotten how much crack we have together. So would highly recommend that you go over and take a wee look at Bairavee's channel. And yeah, if you want to book a session and things like that, she's just fantastic. There's no messing with her at all, which is, I really appreciate that myself. So yeah, stick around and hit subscribe for more fun and witchy adventures. I upload usually every Thursday, and you're not going to want to miss it. Slán agus beannacht, goodbye and good luck to you.
Bye.
Ah, yay!